we want to give you a sort of a quick flash with a bunch of pictures to show you, what Metro can do in its limited role. And let's see, okay. Just as a quick review, Metro's probably unique in the United States anyway, in that it both manages all the money, the planning, the construction, and implementation. Now, of course, we share those funds with Big Blue Bus and with the other cities, counties, and there's 88 municipalities in LA County. But it's important to remember we have this sort of overarching role. And so when we talk about livability, which is our topic today, we can look at that from a number of different perspectives. Our long-range plan is how we carry out our business. If it's not in a plan, we really don't do it. So there's an orderly public process. Of course, Measure R passed by the voters in 2008. And all of these programs together sort of bring a convergence where right now it's just a really great time in LA, and joint development or transit-oriented development is just a part of that. So it's important to remember that our joint development program, when it's at Metro, we do not use funds for Measure R. But you may have heard about TOD at Metro, and there is planning going on at Metro R that is funded by Measure R, but that is planning only. No individual project will directly result from Measure R in that regard. Now, for those of you that need a TOD definition, here's one. I've been always told to make sure I bring a definition with me. I don't know if that does you much good. If you just think of, development on top of transit stations, it's probably a lot easier way to think about it. And that is in fact where most TOD occurs, is around rail stations. It's not the only place where TOD occurs. And we're going to talk about, just very briefly here, about some other versions of TOD, but rail is certainly a great spot for it. And in fact, it is very important to the future of LA County as a whole, as our other speakers have already alluded to, and that's just sheer numbers. For our part, we have, depending on how you count, depending on how many projects are active, something like 30, 40 projects in the overall pipeline. About a dozen done, a couple under construction right now, another dozen in negotiation. It's probably going to cut back a little bit, and probably almost 2 dozen then ultimately in consideration, where we're actually thinking about doing it, but we actually don't have a project negotiated yet. And that's the tally. This has already changed, so not a whole lot of point in honing in on the details, but it is a very nice program in terms of the overall United States framework. It's not me. This is only my 5th year at Metro. It's been, including people like, in this room have been employed by Metro before, and we know that it's a continuum of people over time. So there are specific things that Metro looks for, and those do include fair market return on value. So sometimes when people think of, well, why doesn't Metro do this or that? It's because the project has to pencil. That's sort of developer speak for the land has to be leased to the developers at a fair market return. We cannot just give these projects away. Projects that Metro did work on that included the Community Redevelopment Agency did have public subsidies, but those were done through the CRA, and of course that's over now with the recent budget cuts. But that's another topic. For our part, we can simply have a look at some of the different ways TOD can be realized. It could be on top of a station, it could be near a station, call that transit adjacent development. We mentioned transit villages today. That's where the land area that a joint development or a trans-oriented development project takes up is so large, you need transportation to get from one part of the development to the other. And then, of course, we've also heard the notion of transit corridors, and that's what we have here on Wilshire. So let's take a look at the way that some of these projects have been realized, and a number of these have had planning, and that includes both sort of the overall definition of planning, where you think of city plans, but also project planning that have gone on for just decades. And of course, Union Station is one of those now. Union Station wasn't necessarily, back in the 20s, 30s, when it was constructed, wasn't conceived as a transit-oriented development. They really didn't call it transit-oriented development at that time. It was the aggregation of the various railroads, and they needed a spot to converge. And so you had convergence going on in LA, not only back when the red car and yellow car systems were in place in the 1890 to 1930 framework, but also, again, when we started to rebuild the system. So, you know, if you need metrics, you're going to find them here at Union Station, and our recent acquisition is going to help that along. This particular part, it's interesting to know, is part of the overall station. This is the East Portal, Pata Oris Transit Plaza, and that's actually not part of the planning area in terms of the formal city approvals. Just interesting to note. So that's a great, you know, center, Union Station, but actually 7th Street Metro is its own center. And where is it? I mean, it's just another building, right? It's all underneath. So this is sort of the answer to the question is, what happens when transit comes to you? What happens when buildings are already built? And to some extent, you have a whole-scale change, and that's kind of what happened at Hollywood and Highland, which is now owned by CIM, originally developed by Trizicon, a Canadian firm. It's not here anymore. Walk of Fame, you probably have been out there, a lot of you, but you see this blending into the urban fabric, and that's what the project planning process does, over in addition to the transit lines themselves. And this is sort of going to give you this sort of before and after, where you say, well, what was that? That was those rundown hotels that were mentioned. This was a spot that needed to be cleared so that the transit line itself could be built. The land is used as construction laydown, as a staging area, perhaps also sometimes as parking, but then that is the idea of joint development, simply put. So this gets repeated, of course, again down the street at a considerably more historic intersection, or perhaps equally historic, but perhaps the recognized version. And then what you see now with the W Hotel, and again, great involvement by the city, the CRA, working together with Metro. This is an example, important to note, of both Metro land that is ground leased to the developers and private land, where you put this together. That's called aggregation or assemblage. And that's what you need to sort of get the critical volume necessary to do larger projects like this. And you see that again at Wilshire, Vermont. So I dug up some old pictures just to try to help you sort of, maybe even some of you remember what the corridor was like before. And this is another example where the transit line went in first, the stations went in first, and then afterwards there was a project planning process that conceived of the joint developments, and then coming into the final product. So here again you can see this is conception, these are renderings, and then actually the way it turned out. In this particular instance, some of the remaining land actually went into a public contribution for schools. So it's another way where Metro can get involved in livability in our individual communities. And again, at Wilshire and Western, and this project unfortunately went into bankruptcy, but it's still there, still operating. These are, it doesn't like, it just evaporates and goes away. It continues to operate. We just, have to work it out. Now, those are the sort of high-rise examples, but we also have the sort of, we call type 5 construction, a little bit more, not more than about 5 stories over perhaps a couple of underground parking at Hollywood and Western. And then other examples throughout, whether it's on the Blue Line. Here, there was a parking garage and a shopping center. And here on the Gold Line, you have Del Mar, which is a great example of actually punching through the building itself. And if you've been to that plaza, they have a restaurant. It's really a great manifestation of the mixed-use idea of transit-oriented development. So those are some of the projects that are done. Maybe shift gears a little bit and show you what's sort of ahead of us. Of course, the East Side just opened in 2009. And there's a number of projects here that will have more planning and probably, arguably, smaller scale projects being carried out. One of them is at First Lorena. This is not even a TOD project, this is TAD. It's pretty long hike up the street to the Indiana station, but it's still doable in terms of the type 5 construction, in this case just a couple of stories, but this is entirely appropriate for this scale. So this project's still in negotiation. See that red there, that's Sepulveda. This is our example of a BRT, bus rapid transit, located along the Orange Line. And here we have a very nice sized site. It was let before, it had a negotiation in place, but that is since, we're going to redo this one. So we can then turn our attention to One Santa Fe, and this is where most of my time is going into now. It's in fact right on top of the yard. So this is the Red Line Yard. So the Red Line Yard will be expanded in connection with the West Side Extension down more towards 6th Street. You can read about that in the project documents if you're enterprising. But this red here, this red area, is basically a parking lot, and we're able to make better use of that land by realizing, again, right now, a TAD project. It's about a 10-minute walk from either Union Station or the Gold Line, but arguably if a station goes in at the Red Line where it may be possible in connection with West Side Extension, it will be a true TOD soon enough.
Let me ask a question, go back there, because when I was on the board, it makes real sense to me. One of our successes is to do what BART did. BART went underground and above ground. It's like a 192-mile system with only 75 underwater and other underground, etc. Here at Santa Fe, right there, go back to that, you could put a hotline right now, and we could this weekend go out and pour a platform and not make it a big deal, and we could get service to the art district. Why can't you do that next weekend?
It's that permit process.
I mean, are you thinking about that? Because I know and you're moving some of the art south of 6th?
There's a board action that pertains to this, so we can dig that up for you if you haven't seen it. I'd be happy to send it over. But it actually, it's a technical thing, but it basically, in order to get the Red Line to move faster, to accommodate the subway extension, we probably need to do it anyway. So it's kind of like, yes, it's probably going to be funded and executed pretty soon.
It could be a short line to Union Station.
Yes.
See, it doesn't have to go from there all the way to North Hollywood. It could be a short line.
True.
I'm just saying the opportunity's there to think above and below.
Yes.
It doesn't have to go through Beverly Hills.
It does not. And we welcome your support for that.
We'll talk about it. I apologize, I got to run to the next meeting, but this is very good. And I want to mention one thing, that because I think about us all. what is the most successful thing the United States has done in a public policy matter in the last 50 years?
Highways.
Smoking. Used to be about 55% of Americans smoked, and now it's down to 13%. Here we are at this venue and others here in the Miracle Mile. I just say there is a way to do it, and we did it when the Surgeon General first said that. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Can you think of any other policy the United States has done from a public standpoint? I don't think so. You know, and there's still more work to do, but I wanted to credit our host.
Oh, thank you.
You know, because there's an advocacy there. And I was a sitter once, so I just want to think I was.
Anytime, thank you very much for coming. It's a great reminder, and of course, you know, when transit comes to town, we take a few cars off the road. It's a good thing. So our Westlake MacArthur project is also under construction, and here you have again, a Type 5 project, but you still are able to achieve the densities, or the moderate densities, that are both appropriate for the area and will allow a project to pencil and move forward with a public-private partnership. So one more project to sort of have you take a look at, which sort of may be similar to a number of opportunities along the Miracle Mile. This is like a bus layover. If you've gone to gone to China and you need to get your visa, you've gone down Chateau, and there's like a little layover there. You probably haven't even noticed it, but that is another potential project, and it's sort of in the same category as some of these other buildings. And you'll note these Metro, whatever number it is, 812 or something project, is the former terminal for the Red Line car. And actually, if you go to this area at Pershing Square and park in that grubby-looking corner of a parking lot, and you go into the garage, there's a yellow car, trolley car sitting right there. So the vestiges of our transit system are still with it. So we're very happy to be not only rebuilding the transit lines, but also looking again to how we can create more livability along
Thanks.
our corridors.
Can you go back to your last?
Slide. This was an adaptive reuse project in which an office building was reused. Much of downtown LA transformed on adaptive reuse. And you could not build that building by right today. You could not build it downtown, you could not build it along this corridor. This building, because there was an ordinance that said you can reuse dead old buildings, doesn't have setbacks, doesn't have open space, doesn't have parking, doesn't have height limits, and amazingly, people pay premium rent to be there. So let's think hard as as time goes on and through this corridor development occurs. What we're really after, what is the public's real interest?